This is my true story. I buried my wife 20 years ago with my own hands. I stood over her coffin, watched the dirt fall, and thought that was the end. I spent 2 decades visiting her grave every Sunday. Same flowers, same prayer, same silence. She was gone. That's what I believed. But one morning I walked up that hill and saw the ground torn open. The soil was fresh. The stone was cracked. Her grave was empty. And what they found buried beneath it, it destroyed everything I thought I knew. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe so more people hear my story. Every Sunday, I went. Same time. Same path through the old cemetery on the hill. The grass always wet from morning dew, the air heavy with silence. I carried white lilies wrapped in old newspaper, tied with string. She loved lilies, said they smelled like peace. I didn't believe in peace, but I believed in her. Her grave was the third on the left under the oak tree. I could have found it blindfolded. 20 years. That's how long I'd been walking that same road, talking to the same stone, leaving the same flowers, waiting for something that never answered back. I always started the same way. Brushed the dirt from her name. Ran my hand along the cold marble. Whispered things I should have said when she was alive. Little things. The fence is fixed. The cat's still mean. I still miss your cooking. Talking made it hurt less. It made the grave feel less like a hole and more like a door. The caretaker always nodded when he saw me. He didn't need to ask why I was there. Men my age only visit one place that often. I'd sit on the small bench across from her grave, eat the sandwich I brought, sometimes read a page from the old book she liked. Life had become that simple. Grief had a schedule, and I kept it. Every flower I placed was a promise. One I made the day I lost her. That I wouldn't forget. That I'd keep showing up, even when the world stopped caring. It didn't matter if the sky was burning red or raining cold. I came every week. I told myself it was devotion, not habit. But maybe I was lying. Maybe I just didn't know how to stop visiting her because if I did, she'd really be gone. The town forgot her name years ago. The neighbors who came to her funeral moved away. Even the priest who said the last prayer had long been buried himself. But I stayed. I stayed because someone had to remember. Every step up that hill felt the same. Slow, steady, familiar. My knees ached now, but pain was part of the ritual. The graveyard had aged with me. The stones leaned more each year. The paths cracked. The trees stretched wider. Only her grave never changed. Always clean. Always mine to care for. Sometimes, when the wind blew hard enough, I'd swear I could hear her voice between the branches. Faint, soft, like she was humming. I'd close my eyes and listen until the sound faded. Then I'd open them again, alone as always. That morning felt no different. I had the lilies in my hand, the sun just rising behind the church tower. But something in the air felt strange. The silence wasn't the same. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance. I told myself it was just the weather. I was wrong. As I walked closer to her plot, I noticed the ground first. The dirt didn't look right. It wasn't smooth or settled. It looked disturbed, fresh, like someone had been digging where they shouldn't. I stopped a few feet away. My chest tightened. The edges of her grave were uneven. The flowers from last week were gone. The grass looked torn. The caretaker hadn't touched this place in years without telling me. I dropped the lilies. My knees almost gave out. The sight of it didn't make sense, not after 2 decades of stillness. Graves don't move. The dead don't go anywhere. But something had. I stood there, staring, my breath fogging in the cold air. My first thought wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Then came the second. Someone's done something. I called out for the caretaker, my voice shaking. No answer. The whole cemetery felt hollow, like the world itself was holding its breath. That's when I realized this wasn't a visit anymore. This was the beginning of something else, something that had waited 20 years beneath the ground to be found. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that patch of dirt, Uneven, raw, wrong. My mind kept replaying it, asking the same question over and over. Who touched her grave? And why? The air outside was colder than usual. Mist hung low over the fields, crawling up from the river. I poured myself black coffee and stood by the window. The road leading to the cemetery was barely visible through the fog. For the first time in 20 years, I hesitated to go. Something about that place no longer felt sacred. It felt violated. Still, I went. Old habits don't break easy. I grabbed my coat, my cane, and the lilies I hadn't left the day before. As I walked through the gate, the iron hinges groaned, louder than usual. The world was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the hum of distant cars. It felt like the earth itself was waiting for something. When I reached her plot, my heart dropped. The ground looked worse. The edges of the grave had sunk deeper overnight, like it was breathing. The soil was soft, wet, as if someone had been there again. I bent down and touched it. The dirt crumbled beneath my fingers, fresh and cold. My hand came back dark with moisture. That wasn't how graves were supposed to feel after 20 years. I looked around for footprints, any sign of someone else. There were faint marks, small and shallow, leading from the back fence toward her stone. Not animal tracks, not the caretaker's boots. Someone had stood there, right where I was now, and done something they shouldn't have. My chest tightened as I looked closer. The flowers I had dropped the day before were gone, not blown away, removed. Someone had picked them up and taken them. The thought made my stomach twist. I'd buried my wife once. I couldn't bear to think of anyone disturbing her again. I walked to the caretaker's hut near the church wall, but the door was locked. No sign of him. The old man who'd worked there for years, he was gone too. His tools still leaned against the shed, his gloves on the bench. It looked like he'd just stepped away and never returned. That's when I noticed the crows. 3 of them perched on the fence near her grave, silent and still, watching me. Normally they'd scatter when I got close. Not this time. They didn't move an inch. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I don't scare easy. Life's already done its worst to me. But something about that silence felt unnatural. It wasn't grief anymore. It was warning. I turned back toward her grave, heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe just erosion. Maybe the caretaker doing repairs. But deep down, I knew better. Graves don't sink like that unless something moves beneath them. I took 1 step closer and saw it. A thin line running along the base of the headstone. Like the earth had cracked. I knelt down slowly, knees aching, and ran my hand along the edge. The soil shifted. Something metal glinted faintly beneath the surface, catching the morning light. It wasn't the coffin. It was something else. Something buried lower than it should have been. I stood up fast, nearly losing my balance. My breath came in short bursts. The cemetery stretched out around me, endless rows of stone and silence. But in that moment, every grave felt like it was watching. I took a few steps back, staring at the ground that had once been her resting place. My hands were shaking, but not from age. From something deeper. Dread. I didn't touch it again. Not alone. Not without help. I turned toward the church and made the call to the caretaker's office. My voice barely worked when I spoke. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't leaving until I knew what. The caretaker arrived an hour later, driving his old truck up the gravel road. 2 younger men sat in the back, both quiet, both looking unsure of what they were about to see. I stood by her grave the whole time, cane in one hand, my other buried deep in my coat pocket to stop the shaking. The fog hadn't lifted yet. It clung to the stones, thick and gray, like it didn't want anyone to see what was coming. When the truck stopped, the caretaker climbed out. He was pale, older than I remembered, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his hat. "You said someone dug here?" he asked. His voice cracked when he said it, like even saying the words felt wrong. I nodded toward the grave. He stepped closer, crouched down, and ran his hand along the soil just like I had. He froze almost immediately. "This isn't natural," he said under his breath. "Ground shouldn't be this soft." He motioned for the 2 men to grab the shovels. They exchanged a look. The kind of look men give when they'd rather be anywhere else. Still, they started digging. Slow at first. Careful. I stood back, watching each shovel of dirt rise and fall. The sound of metal against soil echoed through the graveyard like a heartbeat. The deeper they went, the worse the air smelled. Damp. Sour. Like something that had been sealed too long was waking up. The caretaker covered his mouth with a handkerchief. One of the younger men whispered something I couldn't hear. The other told him to shut up. After what felt like hours, one of them hit something hard. The sound rang sharp. Metal. My heart jumped. "That's it," the caretaker said. "That's the coffin." They cleared the rest of the soil around it, brushing off the mud until the edges of the casket came into view. The same one I had paid for 20 years ago. Same brass handles, same wood. My knees nearly buckled at the sight. I hadn't seen it since the day I buried her. I stepped closer, chest tight, every part of me bracing for what came next. The caretaker hesitated before opening it. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. I just nodded. He placed his crowbar under the lid, pried it open slowly, and the hinges creaked like something alive. I held my breath. The air that escaped was cold, heavy, stale. The caretaker leaned over first, then stopped, completely still. His face went white. I moved closer. My cane sank into the soft dirt beside me. I looked inside, empty, no body, no bones, no clothes, just a hollow space. The white lining was still there, crumpled and torn, but she wasn't. The caretaker stepped back, muttering something like a prayer. One of the men crossed himself. The other whispered, "Where the hell is she?" I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. My heart felt like it stopped beating altogether. For a long time, no one said a word. We all just stared into that empty box like it might suddenly make sense if we looked long enough. But there was no logic left, no reason, just absence. Finally, I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched the inside of the coffin. The fabric was damp, cold, rough under my fingertips. That's when I noticed something else. The bottom of the casket wasn't flat anymore. There was a slight bulge beneath the lining, like the ground underneath had shifted. "Dig deeper," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine. The caretaker hesitated, then nodded. The men kept working, shovels cutting into the earth below the coffin. The dirt came up darker, heavier. Every strike sounded different now, like they were hitting against something that didn't belong there. And then, one of them stopped. "Sir," he whispered. His shovel hit metal again. But this time, it wasn't a coffin. It was something else, small, square, and buried deeper than her body ever should have been. The caretaker bent down, brushed away the mud, and there it was. A rusted metal box. Locked. He looked up at me, eyes wide. "You might want to call the police." But I already knew. Whatever was in that box was the reason her grave was empty. And nothing they found in it would bring her back. Only the truth I never wanted to face. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. The fog didn't move. The world just froze around that empty coffin and that rusted box sitting in the dirt. I could hear the caretaker talking somewhere behind me, his voice breaking as he called the police. But it all sounded far away, like I was underwater. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My knees gave out, and I fell against the side of the grave, gripping the edge of the wood. Cold mud smeared across my palms. My wife's coffin. Empty. 20 years I had been talking to an empty grave. The younger men kept backing away, whispering, refusing to look. The caretaker took off his hat and muttered something that sounded like a prayer, though even he didn't seem to believe it. I stared down at that hollow space where she should have been, trying to understand how something so still could disappear. She'd been dead for decades. I buried her myself. I signed the papers. I stood in the rain and watched them lower her down. How could she be gone now? The thought hit me like lightning. Maybe she hadn't died at all. Maybe something else had happened. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Every sound in the cemetery vanished except for my heartbeat. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold me. The caretaker reached down to help, but I pushed him away. "Don't touch me," I said, though my voice cracked halfway through. I didn't want comfort. I wanted answers. The sound of sirens finally broke the stillness. Red and blue lights flashed through the fog, painting the graves like ghosts. 2 police cars stopped at the gate, tires crunching on the gravel. The officers got out, moving slow, hands resting on their belts like they were stepping into something cursed. The caretaker walked over to them, explaining, pointing toward the grave. They both stared for a moment, then nodded. When they approached, one of them asked me to step back. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I blinked, the coffin would vanish too, or worse. Something would crawl out of that black hole in the ground. They started taking pictures, shining flashlights into the dirt, marking the edges with tape. Every flash made my eyes sting. The air felt heavier with each breath. The younger officer climbed down and lifted the metal box from under the coffin. It made a dull, hollow sound when he set it down on the grass. The lock was rusted, half broken. He looked at me and asked if I knew what it was. I didn't answer. I couldn't even speak. I just stared at it. That box had been lying under her all these years, under the weight of her grave, hidden beneath everything I thought I understood. I wanted to open it right then, but they wouldn't let me. The older officer knelt beside it, inspecting the lock. "We'll take it to the station," he said. "Can't risk contaminating anything." The word contaminating echoed in my head, like my wife's grave was now a crime scene. Maybe it was. One of the men asked me when I last saw her. I laughed, a broken, bitter laugh. 20 years ago, I said. At her funeral. My voice didn't even sound human. They started digging around the grave, expanding the hole, searching for anything. Bone fragments, jewelry, a clue. The ground gave a hollow thud under the shovels. No bones, no remains, just earth and rot and emptiness. That's when the fear finally broke me. My breathing turned shallow. My chest tightened. I fell back onto the grass, gasping, the world spinning around me. The caretaker shouted for someone to get help. The officer knelt beside me, told me to stay calm. But how could I? How do you stay calm when you realize the person you buried, the person you've mourned every single day, might never have been there at all? They lifted me to my feet and led me to the bench by the oak tree. My whole body trembled, but I couldn't look away. The grave that once held my peace now held a secret I didn't understand. The older officer turned to me before they carried the box to the car. "Sir," he said quietly, "whatever's in here, it's going to change everything." He was right. I just didn't know how much. By evening, the cemetery looked like a war zone. Yellow tape around her grave, flashlights cutting through the fog, radios crackling with static. The quiet place I had visited for 20 years was now full of strangers stepping over the ground I once called sacred. I sat on the same bench where I used to leave her flowers, staring at the hole that used to hold my peace. Every now and then, an officer would glance my way, pity in their eyes, fear in mine. They opened the metal box under the floodlight. I couldn't see much from where I sat, but I saw their faces, the way they changed when the lid came off. The younger officer muttered something, stepped back fast. The older one just stared, then looked toward me. He said something quietly to his partner and closed the box again. I could tell it wasn't good. One of them walked over and crouched beside me. "Mr. Lang," he said softly, "we're going to need you to come to the station tomorrow. There's something in that box you should see." I asked him what they found, but he didn't answer. He just nodded toward the grave and said, "Someone's been down there more than once." That night, they dug around her grave with machines. Every strike of metal on earth sounded like thunder. The ground was deeper now, almost twice as deep as it should have been. They found old shoe prints, small, narrow, made by someone who wasn't heavy. Not recent, but not ancient either. Maybe a few months old. I tried to think who it could be. I hadn't seen anyone near her plot in years. No family, no strangers, just me. They took the coffin apart piece by piece. inspecting every plank of wood, every nail, every corner. No signs of decay where a body should have been. Just empty cloth, damp soil, and a faint smell of rust and mildew. One of the forensic men said quietly, "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for." I wanted to shout at them to stop digging, to leave her alone, but I didn't. Because deep down, I wasn't sure she deserved to be left alone anymore. When the police finally packed up for the night, the grave looked hollow and endless. They told me not to come back until the investigation was over. I nodded, but I knew I'd return anyway. That grave wasn't theirs to guard. It was mine. The next morning, I went to the station. The same officer from last night was waiting for me. He led me into a small room, closed the blinds, and placed the box on the table between us. The metal looked older in daylight, rusted, scratched. The smell that came from it was strange, like old paper and perfume that had long lost its sweetness. He opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all black and white. Some were worn, corners curled, others newer. My heart sank when I saw the first face. It was her, my wife, younger, smiling, but not with me, with someone else. A man I didn't recognize. In every picture, they looked close, too close. Beaches, motels, dinners. One even showed her wearing the same necklace I buried her with. My stomach turned cold. The officer kept going. Beneath the photos were letters, dozens of them, written in her handwriting, each one signed with her name, and another, the same man. The letters weren't love notes from the past. They were instructions, bank numbers, dates, names, money, hidden accounts, all dated before she died, and one dated after. My mouth went dry. "After?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The officer nodded slowly. "This one's from 3 months after her burial." Postmarked in another state, I felt the world tilt. "That's impossible," I said. He slid the letter across the table. The handwriting was hers. The signature was hers. Every loop, every line. My wife, the woman I buried 20 years ago, had written it. The officer leaned back, his face pale. "Mr. Lang," he said quietly, "I don't think your wife died in that coffin." I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me, the walls closing in. My hands gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. For 20 years, I'd been mourning a ghost. Now I wasn't sure who I had buried at all. The letter shook in my hands. The ink had bled in spots, as if written in haste or with trembling fingers. The words were short, direct. No affection, no apology. Just instructions. A name I didn't know. An address in another state. A message about keeping things quiet. My wife's signature sealed it at the bottom, as real as the day she used to sign grocery lists. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The officer sat across from me, silent, waiting. I could tell he had seen hundreds of strange things in his career, but not this. Not a dead woman writing from beyond her own grave. He slid another envelope forward. "This one was inside the lining of the box," he said. "We had to pry it open." Inside was a smaller note, written on yellowed paper. It said only 6 words. "Don't trust the grave you built." My throat closed, my wife's handwriting again, looping, gentle, unmistakable. But it was dated 2 days before her funeral. I felt cold all over. "What is this supposed to mean?" I asked. The officer hesitated. Then he opened a folder beside him and pulled out a photo. A black and white crime scene image, faded, but clear enough. "That's your wife's coffin," he said, "from the day she was buried. Look here." He pointed to the edge of the photo where a small patch of earth had already been disturbed, faint boot prints visible in the dirt, smaller than a man's, deeper than a woman's. "These prints," he said, "don't match anyone who attended the funeral." We checked the old records. I stared at the photo. My wife's coffin, still sealed, surrounded by faces I remembered. Family, friends. But in the corner, where the camera barely caught the edge, a shadow. A faint silhouette standing near the tree line, blurred but unmistakably human. "Who's that?" I whispered. "We don't know," he said. but we think whoever that was came back years later." He opened another envelope and pulled out a new photo, this one taken a month ago by a groundskeeper's security camera. The same shadow, the same posture, standing near her grave. At night. Alone. My pulse pounded in my ears. "So you're saying someone came back to dig her up?" "Not someone," he said quietly. "We think it might have been her." The words didn't make sense. My mind rejected them immediately. "She's dead," I said. "I saw her. I buried her." The officer sighed. "Mr. Lang, the body that was in that coffin, we're not sure it was her. There's no DNA record, no death certificate filed under her maiden name, and the hospital that supposedly issued the report," he flipped another page, "doesn't exist anymore." The room went silent. It felt like the air had been sucked out. I looked down at my hands, old, shaking, useless. All those years of grief. All the nights I spent talking to her grave like a fool. Every flower, every whisper, every prayer, all for nothing. He said they'd reopened her case, officially reclassifying it as a possible identity fraud and missing person investigation. But all I heard was the clock ticking on the wall, counting down the seconds of my own foolish life. The officer handed me the last photograph. "We think you should see this," he said. It was a picture of a woman, older now, gray hair tucked under a scarf, lines across her face that time couldn't hide. She was standing in front of a small church in another state, holding a newspaper. And though she looked older, thinner, worn down by years, I knew that face. The same eyes. The same faint scar above her lip. My wife. Taken just 6 months ago. The paper in her hands was dated that same week. The headline read, "Local woman attends husband's funeral after years apart." The officer looked at me with quiet sympathy. "We're still confirming, but..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I sat there, staring at the photo, my breath coming shallow. My wife hadn't died. She had disappeared. And somewhere, somehow, she had buried someone else in her place. I stared at that photograph for what felt like hours. The edges crumpled in my shaking hands. Her face. Older, yes, but still the same woman I had kissed goodnight for 30 years. The same woman I watched take her last breath, or at least I thought I did. I had spent decades speaking to a tombstone, whispering love into the dirt, while she was somewhere out there, breathing air, walking streets, living another life. The officer said they had traced the location in the picture, a small town in New Mexico, population barely 2,000. He showed me another document, property records, a house registered under a false name, the same handwriting as her letters. "We believe she's been living under the alias Evelyn Hartman," he said. My wife's maiden name had been Hart. The similarity wasn't coincidence. It was a clue she'd left behind, one I was too blind to ever see. They found more. Bank accounts opened years after her supposed death. Wire transfers sent to someone listed as her business partner. But this wasn't business. It was life. A secret one. One file showed a marriage certificate. Her signature beside another man's. A ceremony that took place 12 years after her funeral. My stomach turned so hard I thought I might be sick. For 20 years, I mourned her. And for 12 of those, she was married to someone else. The police didn't know how to tell me more. I could see it in their faces, the pity, the confusion. They said the new husband died 5 years ago. Heart attack. And after that, she vanished again. No records, no sightings, just empty paper trails. She had done this before, after all. She was good at disappearing. When they let me go, I drove home in silence. The road blurred through my tears. Every streetlight felt like it was watching me. I didn't turn the radio on. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. I sat in my chair and stared at the picture of her grave on one side of the table and the picture of her alive on the other. Death on the left, life on the right, and me in between, not belonging to either world. By morning, I started going through her old things again. Boxes of photos, letters, journals. I thought maybe I'd find more clues, something that would explain why. But what I found instead made my chest tighten. Hidden beneath her wedding dress, folded so neatly it almost hurt to touch, was an envelope addressed to me. No stamp, no seal, just my name in her handwriting. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe she left it there years ago. Or maybe someone had placed it after she was gone. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, a single page. If you ever find this, I'm sorry. I couldn't be who you thought I was. I loved you once, but not enough to die as her. Forgive me if you can. Forget me if you can't. That was all. No explanation. No reason. Just a confession written like a goodbye she didn't have the courage to say in person. I sat there, reading it over and over, the words dissolving into tears. The woman I buried was gone, but the woman I loved had never really existed. Later that day, the police called again. They said they had traced one of her old aliases to a nursing home 2 towns over. The record said she'd checked out 6 months ago, no forwarding address. But the staff remembered her. Quiet lady, they said. Kept to herself. Always paid in cash. That night, I drove out there. Parked across from the home. The staff showed me her last signature in their logbook. Same name, same handwriting. The date? 2 days before they found her grave empty. She had come back. Not for me. Not for forgiveness. But for something she left behind. And whatever it was, she'd taken it with her. The next morning, I sat by the window with her letter in my hand, staring out at the mist crawling over the hills. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every sound outside made me think she was there, somewhere in the fog, watching. After all those years, I wasn't sure if I wanted to see her again or let her ghost stay gone. But I needed answers. Not from the police, not from the files, from the ground itself. So I drove back to the cemetery. The yellow tape was gone, replaced by silence. The grave still open, a dark mouth in the earth. I stood over it and tried to feel something. Anger, grief, even relief. Nothing came. Only the ache of knowing that the woman I buried had never really been mine. The caretaker was there, older than me, shoveling slowly, trying to fill the hole. He looked up, nodded once, and said quietly, "They left a few things for you." From his pocket, he handed me a small evidence bag. Inside was a thin silver ring, bent slightly at the edge, and a folded piece of damp paper. I took it with trembling hands, opened the paper carefully. It wasn't a note. It was a map. A small hand-drawn sketch of the cemetery, a red X marked near the base of a large oak tree at the edge of the lot. My heart thudded hard. That was where I first proposed to her 40 years ago. I walked there slowly, each step heavier than the last. The ground looked untouched, covered in fallen leaves and thyme. I brushed them aside with my cane, crouched down, and dug my fingers into the soil. Not deep, just enough to feel the edge of something solid. Metal. A small tin box. Old. Rusted. The lock had corroded away. I opened it right there beneath the gray morning sky. Inside were photographs, newer ones this time. Her, older, smiling. But in every one, there was someone else beside her. A boy, young, maybe 12 or 13. Brown hair, same eyes as hers, same jawline as mine. My chest went tight. There was no note this time, no confession, just the truth laid bare in a photograph. The boy wasn't a stranger. He was my blood. All those years she was gone, she wasn't just running from me. She was protecting someone, or hiding him. Maybe both. I drove back to the police with the box in my lap, barely able to hold the wheel steady. When I handed it over, the officer looked through the photos carefully, his brow furrowing. He called for another detective, whispered something. Then he looked at me and said, "Mr. Lang, the boy in these photos. We ran his DNA through the database. He's alive. He's a grown man now, and he's been looking for her too." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The room tilted. The air felt thinner. They showed me a file, a recent one. A man named Daniel Hartman, age 35. The age matched, the name matched. But the birth records didn't. It said his mother was Evelyn Hartman. No father listed. The officer looked at me carefully. "Mr. Lang," he said, "I think she faked her death to protect your son." My hands went cold. My son. The boy I never knew existed, hidden from me for decades, buried beneath a false grave and a life built on lies. She hadn't run from love. She had run from danger. The box also contained old bank slips, police reports, one even marked witness protection. She had seen something long ago, something that forced her to vanish. And all this time, I had been mourning her, while she was out there, saving a part of both of us. I walked out of that station in silence. The sun was setting, bleeding red through the clouds. I didn't know where she was, or if I'd ever see her again. But for the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel alone. Somewhere out there, I had a son, the proof that not everything she left behind was a lie. I returned to the cemetery at dusk, when the sky bled orange into gray and the air smelled like rain. The place was empty, silent except for the wind sighing through the trees. The workers had filled her grave again, leveled the dirt, and set the headstone back upright. From a distance, it looked untouched, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Beneath that stone was not death. It was truth. The kind that sleeps until someone is brave or foolish enough to dig. I stood there for a long time, holding the tin box they'd let me keep. The photos were inside, sealed in plastic now, safe from the earth that once hid them. I looked down at her name carved in stone, tracing the letters with my fingers. Margaret Lang, 1948 to 2003. The dates meant nothing now. She had lived years beyond them, in shadows and under another name. I thought about all the times I'd come here before, talking to her, praying to her, apologizing for things I didn't even do. I realized then that I wasn't talking to her grave. I was talking to my own blindness. I had loved her so completely, so purely, that I never saw the cracks beneath the surface. Love, I learned, can make you deaf to truth and blind to warning signs. A small gust of wind blew through the flowers I'd brought, the same white lilies as always. They tilted, brushing against the cold stone, like they were bowing. For a moment, I thought I heard her laugh, faint, distant, the way it used to echo through our kitchen when the world still felt kind. I almost smiled. I spoke out loud, voice low and tired. "You could have told me," I said. "You didn't have to carry it alone." My voice cracked, but I didn't cry. I had no tears left, only understanding. Because now, I knew. She hadn't betrayed me. She hadn't lied for greed or shame. She had done it to protect what mattered most, a child, our child. A secret that had to stay buried, to stay alive. The grave wasn't her escape, it was her shield. I remembered the last thing she ever said to me on that hospital bed. Her hand weak in mine, her lips trembling. "Promise me you'll forgive me for everything someday." I thought she meant the small things, the arguments, the time apart. I didn't realize she meant everything. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and slow. I didn't move. I let them hit my face, mix with the dirt on my hands. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "You did what you had to do." The words felt like an exhale I'd been holding for 20 years. Before I left, I took one of the lilies and laid it against the stone. Then I placed the tin box beside it, half buried in the soil. Not as evidence, as forgiveness. It didn't matter anymore where her body was or if she was even still alive somewhere. What mattered was that I finally understood. As I turned to leave, lightning flickered far off in the clouds, and for a split second, I saw something move between the trees. A figure, wrapped in a long coat, standing still in the rain. I froze. The face was hidden by shadow, but the posture, I knew it. She was watching. Then, as quick as the flash came, the figure was gone. I didn't chase. I didn't call out. Some ghosts don't need to speak. They just need to be seen once more. I walked back to my car, heart calm for the first time in years. As I drove away, the rain fell harder, washing the road clean behind me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I'd spent 20 years looking back. Tonight, I was finally ready to let go. They say graves hold the dead, but I learned that some graves hold the living too. The pieces of us that never stop searching for what's gone. For 20 years, I thought I was visiting her. But I was really visiting the part of myself that refused to accept the truth. I kept bringing flowers to a lie because believing in love, even a broken one, was easier than facing what she'd done. When they found that empty coffin, it didn't just expose her secret. It exposed mine. I wasn't mourning her anymore. I was mourning the years I gave to someone who never existed the way I imagined. The woman I loved, the woman I buried, and the woman who walked away. They were all the same person, and none of them were who I thought they were. People ask what I felt when I found out she was alive. Relief? Anger? Maybe both. But mostly, I felt small. Like the world had been bigger than I ever realized, and I had been standing in one corner of it, blind by choice. She built a second life because she couldn't survive in the first. Maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was survival. I think about the man in those photos, the boy who grew up never knowing me, carrying her eyes and my blood. Somewhere out there, he's living a life she wanted to protect. I don't blame her anymore for that. The truth hurts, yes, but sometimes truth is just love wearing a cruel disguise. I still visit the grave, not every week, but sometimes. I don't bring lilies anymore. I bring stones, small, smooth ones I pick up on the walk there. I leave them on top of her headstone, one for every year I loved her, one for every year she lied, and one for every year I've spent forgiving her. The pile grows slowly. Some days the wind knocks a few down. That's fine. It's how healing works. You rebuild what time erodes. I never found her again. Not in person, not in flesh. Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she isn't. But I stopped looking. Because some truths don't need closure. They just need peace. When I walk past her grave now, I don't see an empty coffin. I see a full life, complicated, painful, and unfinished. I see a woman who made choices I'll never understand, and a man who finally learned to stop needing every answer. The ground beneath her headstone no longer feels like loss. It feels like release. I used to think love was about holding on. Now I know it's about knowing when to let go. So when people ask me what happened that day, when they say, "You found your wife's grave empty," what did they find beneath it? I tell them this: they didn't find bones. They found truth, the kind that doesn't rest, even under stone. Then I smile, slow and tired, and walk away. Because that's all there is left to do. Because after all this time, I've learned that grief doesn't end with answers. It ends when you stop digging.